Mr. Demirjian, before you continue, I would remind you to pace yourself so that, because there's this natural tendency that we all have to speed up, particularly when we deal with written.
I've been reminded by the interpreters as well. Thank you, Your Honors. Before the break, Your Honors, we were reaching the stage where we were discussing the conditions in the detention camps. Now, we have heard repeatedly from victims detained in these detention facilities that the conditions were simply appalling. Conditions for proper hygiene did not exist. You heard from ST08, from Teslić, who was held in the SJB cells. He recognized several prominent members of the Muslim community in Teslić. And there were up to 50 Muslims and Croats held in the cells at one point. Clearly inadequate for the number of detainees held there. What he said was this: at some point, we couldn't sit. We had to stand up. People used to stand up even in the toilet. You could smell the ammonia from the urine, so it was quite unbearable. The tears used to come out of our eyes because of the smell of ammonia. We used to shout, "Give us some air or kill us," because we needed some air. Beatings were commonplace at the SJB building, and several times non-Serbs would be beaten at the entrance of the SJB, and detainees in the cells could hear and watch the beating. At least on one occasion, the police chief Dusan Kuzmanović and the police commander Predrag Markočević watched the beatings from the entrance of the station, standing there laughing. Such beatings in the SJB building and later at the TO warehouse would lead to the death of several non-Serb civilians. In Donji Vakup, the police was involved with the army in attacking villages inhabited by Muslims. Following such attacks, the police reported that there was a need to establish a collection center for Croatians and Muslim men. And the SJB dealt with everything, and the police were in charge of providing security. This was reported by the SJB chief himself. The SJB reported that during the month of June it was holding 123 Muslims and Croats, and that it had transferred 28 detainees to Manjača camp. But it is in Prijedor, it is the camps in Prijedor, which became the epitome of dreadful conditions in detention facilities. The camps of Keraterm, Omarska, and Trnopolje captured the attention of the international media in July of '92 and clearly sent a signal to the Serb authorities that what was happening in these places was clearly unacceptable. Lack of access to proper hygiene, lack of food, and daily beatings were part of the diet imposed on the prisoners held in Prijedor camps. The authorities in Prijedor did not label Omarska or Trnopolje camps, as you will see in the following video. During the visit of the international media, the prisoners were too scared to describe the conditions at these camps. The video begins at the Omarska camp.
Here we were shown only several hundred of the 2,500 prisoners, all Muslim men. At Omarska we were told to be interrogated. Those found guilty of fighting Serbs were then sent to prison war camps, the innocents to refugee camps. This is all we saw of the prisoners and of Omarska itself. They never spoke. The only voices, those of the guards ordering them to eat faster and leave. How are you treated? What are the conditions, I asked. I don't want to tell lies. I can't speak the truth. Thank you for coming. We were told that the army does not control a massacre. These prisoners are the responsibility of the civil authorities and local militia. We sought an explanation from the camp commandant.
You can pause here. You can see right here at the left the SJB chief, Simo Drlacha, and to the right, Nara Balaban, the administrator of the Umarska camp. You can continue.
Describe this as a prison camp, a transit camp, or a refugee camp.
No, this is not the camp, this is the center, the transit center. Umarska and Ternopil, both the centers, not camps.
And then the men left, back to wherever they'd come from, away from our cameras and questions, hidden from the United Nations and the Red Cross, who've been denied access to Umarska, hidden until now from the world. We were not allowed to follow them to their living accommodation, what appeared to be the larger of the two buildings, to see the other 2,000 detainees and how they live.
What's your reason? Just to try to do my best here. To show us where they live.
When Dr. Karadžić, why are you not fulfilling Dr. Karadžić's promise to us?
He promised us something else and said, you can do this and that and not that.
We've seen nothing. We've seen one dining hall and 80 prisoners. And so we left, our hosts fulfilling their promise to show us the second camp, Trenopolie, where 2,000 refugees are living. We were not prepared for what we saw and heard there.
The visit of the international media left the world with an unforgettable image of a terrified doctor, Idris Merjanic, as he's being asked by the journalist about the conditions in Ternopilje camp.
We ourselves saw no evidence of beatings on any refugee here, and we only heard their allegations. Allegations even the camp doctor seemed unable to substantiate in front of our Serb hosts.
Did you get any cases here of people who've been beaten from the other camp?
Ali imate slučaj da su bili neki koji su tučeni u drugom kampu, recimo kod navedeni ovdje. Ima tako. Yes.
Many?
Da li ih ima mnogo ili...
Would you be happy speaking in our language?
Yes, absolutely.
I was able, however, to smuggle out a roll of film, and the man who took these pictures and gave it to me said he would be killed if caught. He begged me to check that in 3 days he was still alive.
This is the detention facility, which was labeled as a transit center, Your Honors. Within the limited time we have, it would be impossible to expose the details of every single detention facility. Suffice it to say that in most of these detention facilities, one can observe striking similarities. In all cases, detainees are Muslim or Croat civilians. Detainees are never informed of the reasons behind their arrest. The detainees are underfed and lose a considerable amount of weight. The detainees are repeatedly beaten and mistreated by guards, soldiers, policemen, and members of paramilitary units. Several detainees die of their injuries. In some facilities, such as the sawmill in Kotorvaros, detained women are raped repeatedly by guards and soldiers or policemen who entered the facility. Some women became pregnant as a result. In some cases, detainees are executed in large numbers while being detained. The following incidents spring to mind. The massacre of about 180 Muslim and Croat civilians in room 3 at Karaterm camp. The murder of 80 Muslim and Croat men in the Crkvina warehouse in Bosanski Shamac. The murder of dozens of non-Serbs held at the Luka camp in Brčko. Murder of about 175 men at Gero's slaughterhouse. And the killing of about 20 non-Serbs at the Čelopek Dom Kultur in Zvornik, as well as the killing of non-Serb civilians held at the Sušica camp in Vlasenica in the summer of '92. Your Honors, another mean to Another means to ensure the spread of terror, with the aim of forcing non-Serb population to leave Serb-held territory, came through the acts of murder, whereby dozens of Muslims and Croat civilians were coldly executed. You've heard evidence of killings at Velagići in the municipality of Cluj, where 77 Muslim men were killed after being detained shortly in the school. They were collected from surrounding villages from their homes. In Brčko, the town of Brčko became a large killing site during 1992. Non-Serbs who were detained in the camp, in the SJB, in the Partisan Hall, the Laser Bus Company, were routinely subjected to torture and killings. You heard from Isak Gashi that he witnessed the killing of civilians in one of the streets leading to the marketplace on the 6th or the 7th of May. Mr. Gashi was in a building in the old part of town when he saw, at a distance of about 30 to 40 meters, a policeman dressed in the typical civilian police uniform. The policeman shot and killed 3 civilians right there in the street. About 50 meters away, he saw men in camouflage uniforms killing about 12 more civilians. In a now famous series of photographs captured in Brčko at the time, Gashi was able to identify the same street where these killings occurred. You'll see on the first slide a policeman, on the second slide the policeman aiming at a civilian, and the third picture, a civilian lying down. Bodies were picked up by a refrigerator truck, which was frequently seen coming and going in the streets of Brčko. This picture shows how these bodies were discarded in a mass grave in Brčko. In Visegrad, on the 14th of June, a group of non-Serb civilians from the village of Koritnik, mainly women, children, and the elderly, were forced to flee their village. Arriving in Visegrad on foot, the group was placed in houses on Pionirska Street, in the Muslim neighborhood of Mahala, which is located 400 meters away from the police station. Soon thereafter, Milan and Sredoje Lukic, along with other armed Serbs, arrived at the house. They first robbed the villages of their valuables before leaving, taking 1 woman with them, whom they would rape. Later that night, the Lukic brothers and the other armed Serbs moved this group to a house next door. They locked them up in a single room. The house was set on fire. Those detained who tried to escape through the windows were shot. Approximately 60 people were burned alive in this house fire. This next map, Your Honors, will illustrate the killings charged in the indictment. And I will summarize. For the month of May, in the first wave, we can go to the first animation, we can see killings in various locations, such as the prison in Vlasenica, the killing of 22 non-Serbs at Nova Kasaba, taken from the Vlasenica prison, the Drinjača school in Zvornik, the killing of over 800 non-Serb civilians during the attack and shelling of the village of Kozarac, Prijedor, and many more. Moving on to the month of June, many killings included the notorious events such as the aforementioned killing of 77 Muslim men in Velagići, the killing of over 20 non-Serbs in front of the medical center in Kolorovaroš on the 25th of May, the killing of over 170 men at Gero Slaughterhouse, the killing of about 20 men by members of the Yellow Wasps in the Čelopek Dom Kultur, and many more. In July, you have heard evidence of the killing of 144 men in the Biljani school in Cluj on the 10th of July, the killing of 180 non-Serbs in room 3 at Karaterm, and the killings of about 24 to 25 non-Serb men during their transfer from Sanski Most to the Manjača camp on the 7th of July. I apologize. The hospital center in Kotovaras was in the month of June. In August, we have heard about the killing of about 200 non-Serbs transported from Tornjopolje camp on the Vlasic mountain cliffs, also known as Koričanske stijene. We've heard of killings of Muslims and Croats at the Manjača camp, and we have also heard of killings of non-Serbs on the Kotlina bridge in Gacko. In October, we have one last killing, this time at the building behind the SJB in Bileća. Your Honors, the facts speak volume about the determination of the Bosnian Serb leadership to remove Muslim and Croat civilians from Serb-held territories. Killings such as those we just glanced over serve two purposes: physically destroying parts of the population which was intended to be removed, and create an atmosphere of terror which would prompt the rest of the population to leave the area. Your Honors have also heard various accounts of attacks, armed attacks on non-Serb parts of towns and villages. A cursory review of the evidence allows one to observe yet another pattern which would force Muslims and Croats to leave their homes. For example, on the 27th of May, the village of Pudin Han in Cluj was heavily shelled, killing a number of inhabitants as a consequence. Following the takeover of Doboj, the Muslim neighborhood of Charshia was shelled on the 3rd of May, damaging the main mosque. In Zvornik, you heard in the earlier video how the UN envoy reported the anti-aircraft cannons shelling from the Serbian side of the river into Muslim villages in Zvornik. In Visegrad, you heard how journalist Ian Traynor qualified the attack on the 13th of April in one of his articles. Referring to the army, he stated, "There is little doubt that they and the Serbian irregulars are moving in for the kill." He added in court, still referring to the army and Serb paramilitary troops, "As they moved towards Visegrad, they were together. I was standing beside them as they were firing rockets into Visegrad, both from artillery pieces." In Kotovaras, we have had the chance to view a video showing the attack on Muslim parts of town by airplane, showing the superiority of the equipment from the Serb forces. If you could see this video, please.
Juče I danas učestvovala je I avijacija Srpske Republike Bosne I Hercegovine, gađajući po odabranim ciljevima neprijatelja. Na strani muslimansko-hrvatske paravojske broj poginulih prešao je cifru od 300, dok je ranjenih mnogo više. Samo u jučerašnjim I današnjim borbama muslimansko-hrvatski ekstremisti imali su više od 100 ranjenih, poginulih I oko 200 ranjenih. Svoje civile, muslimanske žene, djecu I starce, koje ekstremisti drže kao taoci, muče ih I ubijaju.
Yes, for the record, this is Exhibit P 2014. Your Honors, as a result of persecutory measures, large numbers of Muslims and Croats left the Serb-controlled area. And when they didn't leave on their own, the Serb leadership made sure to facilitate their departure by organizing convoys of buses, thereby expelling thousands of non-Serb civilians. In Sanski Most, between 3,500 and 5,000 non-Serbs left as a result of the takeover in April '92. In Kotovaras, out of 10,640 Croats, only 1,000 remained following the takeover. And from 11,000 Muslims, only 4,500 remained. Again, Suleiman Crnčalo explained to Your Honors that people were rounded up by the RS MUP to be placed on buses that left Pali in convoys. RS MUP policemen escorted the convoys. And in late June, a number of Muslims from Pali were also transferred by buses. In Zvornik, quotes are attributed to the Serbian mayor, Brano Grujic, which provided chilling insight into the changing nature of that municipality from 1992. In 1993, he stated that the demographics are now different. Zvornik once had a population of almost 70,000, with more than 60% being Muslims. Today, the mosque has been blown up, and the city is more than 90% Serb. Maybe even 99%. The next video will illustrate what forcible transfer and deportation means.
Some 2,000 people were unaccounted for. Nobody knows how many of them were executed on the spot, or how many were sent to concentration camps, where the murder continued. The rest were expelled. 49,000 Muslims lived in Zvornik. None remain. 5 centuries of Islamic life and culture there were erased. This is ethnic cleansing. It became routine as the Serbs took control of 3/4 of Bosnia's territory. In time, they learned to keep the cameras out, but ethnic cleansing continued.
This was Exhibit P908, Your Honors. In Bijeljina, you have heard evidence from Milorad Davidović that one of the architects of this expulsion was the CSB chief, Predrag Ješurić. Another one of these architects was Vojkan Đurković. You can play the next video clip, please.
My guide was Vojkan Đurković, who was one of Bijeljina's most prominent citizens. He was one of the 60 fighters who seized the town for the Serbs at the beginning of the war. Vojkan was especially proud of his expensive Italian sunglasses. Men like him are doing very well these days in the Bosnian Serb Republic. At his office, Vojkan had assembled some of the last Muslims left in Bijeljina. He said they're his friends. Vojkan is president of the Regional Commission for the Free Movement of the Civilian Population. That means he's in charge of ethnic cleansing. A report prepared for the UN says he's led groups of armed men who've been terrorizing the Muslim community. Vojkan cheerfully denies it all.
Meni je drago što je došla ova televizijska ekipa. Jesam da došao sam. Molim vas, nisam bandit, nisam pljačkaš, nisam etnički čista. Šta sam vam...
He's turned ethnic cleansing into an official procedure and turned Bijeljina into such an ethnically Serb town that these Muslims are desperate to get out.
Treba da se zahvale srpskoj državi što im je omogućila da pređu tamo gdje oni žele da pređu. Znači, srpskoj državi što je poštovala maksimalno ljudska prava o slobodi kretanja civilnog stanovništva.
This is Exhibit P140, Your Honors, and in another excerpt of this video, Đurković claims that he should be receiving the Nobel Peace Prize because he estimated that he had saved thousands of lives. Speaking of the Muslims he had just thrown out, he would go on to add these words. They were tourists who took a stroll from Bijeljina to Tuzla, or to Berlin, or to somewhere else. Let them come back. Đurković was seen at Luka camp, as was told to you by Isak Gashi. Now in Banja Luka, Your Honors, resettlement agencies were also settled, and you have heard from witness S225 the following. Unfortunately, those are the most tragic moments in the lives of us. Your friends, brothers, fathers, neighbors are leaving. Maybe the most difficult the citizens of Banja Luka went through during that period. And it went on and on. Convoy after convoy, bus after bus. Very difficult goodbyes from the assembly points, where the citizens of Banja Luka went to get on the buses. And for those who stayed behind, there was uncertainty. Huge uncertainty as to what would become of them. If I were to single out some moments from the overall tragedy in the area, then I would choose this. These are very earth-shattering experiences. As adequately reported in a 1KK report on the 1st of June 92, a portion of the Muslim and Croat population is moving out. Those departing will not be allowed to return. It's Exhibit P411.29. Your Honors have also heard throughout the trial that the homes and property of non-Serbs were systematically torched and destroyed. With the limited time we have, Your Honors, here's a video of the result of attacks on the villages of Kozarac, on the village of Kozarac.
We visited the ethnically cleansed Kozarac in northern Bosnia last week. We were closely supervised by the local Serb militia, restricted to just a few blocks of the town, once home to about 15,000 Muslim men, women, and children. Today, there are no Muslims there, none, and none of their X-marked homes is intact. Other homes in Kozarac have been marked to survive. This one with the colors of the Serbian flag. This one says, "This is Serbian." They stand undamaged like the remaining Serb residents of Kozarac, surrounded in silence, deadly silence.
This was Exhibit P1718. It was filmed in October 1992. As highlighted by one witness, Your Honors, not a single Serb house had been attacked in Kozarac. Your Honors, let me conclude with these words. The trial chamber has received a great deal of evidence, killings of Muslims and Croat civilians, and infliction of bodily harm in 1992 on a massive scale. I also received considerable evidence on atrocious conditions in detention facilities. We asked the trial chamber to keep in mind the considerable evidence about the forcible displacement and systematic transfer of the territory claimed by the Serbs. The trial chamber must assess the evidence in conjunction with the statements of the Bosnian Serb leadership, anticipating the takeover of large parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the creation of ethnically pure areas. The intent of the Bosnian Serb leadership can be inferred from several aspects of the evidence, including the scale and the pattern of the attacks, their intensity, the substantial number of Muslims killed, the detention of Muslims and Croats, their brutal treatment in those detention facilities, the destruction of their property. These are all factors that must be considered by the trial chamber. And this concludes our presentation on the evidence of pattern. I will now leave the floor to Ms. Corner, who will deal with the background to the creation of the RS movement.
Before you do so, Mr. Demijan, could you just clarify one thing? The video you showed with the aircraft bombing some targets on land, when was that taken?
July 1992.
And you referred to Exhibit P2014?
2014, that's correct.
But that appears to be an interview with Stojan Župljanin, Berjanin, and Momir Taric.
It's a video. It's a compilation of a video showing interviews, and interspersed in those videos there are clippings that show the attacks. There are various attacks in that video. You'll also see soldiers carrying shells that are being fired towards mosques and inhabited areas.
Thank you.
May I, as I explained earlier this morning, say a little bit about the background to the creation of the MUP, because the Stanišić final brief devotes a number of pages to the testimony of the Serb members of the RS MUP, and who had formerly been members of the BAH MUP, and who gave their reasons, to your honours, for what could be said to be their disenchantment with the state of the BAH MUP between the beginning of 91 and April of 1992. We would submit that obviously it's a one-sided view. For obvious reasons, Your Honours didn't hear from really any of the Muslim members of the BIH MUP, except very briefly those who were victims. It is said in paragraph 44 of the brief that the recitation of the background of the events provides the context and reasons for the split in the MUP, which took place at the beginning of April 1992. Well, Your Honours, can we make one thing absolutely clear? That there's no dispute in this case that after the 1990 elections, the HDZ, the SDA, and the SDS entered into an agreement on the division of posts that was to take place amongst their separate nominees, governmental posts and MUP posts. In the MUP, the minister, of course, was Deli Mustafic, who was SDA, or Muslim, the deputy minister, Mr. Žepanić, and the undersecretary for the SDB was a Croat named Kvezic. And it's equally not disputed at all that this so-called agreement led to, in fact, a number of disagreements and much arguing about personnel and positions and who had what. The complaints which were rehearsed as a result of questions from the defence by nearly all the witnesses, which are repeated in the final trial brief, was that the Serb police were being marginalised, that this was the fault of the SDA, that unqualified Muslims from Sanjak were being recruited, the iniquities of persons such as Mr. Habib and Mr. Ali Babic. All of those complaints, in fact, were being made in June 1991 by a Serb ex-employee of the MUP named Goran Zečević. It's P517, and Your Honours can see some excerpts from that document. It's addressed to the Council of the SDS, and talks about what grieves my colleagues is that the SDS lost the Secretariat of the Interior, positions that should have been falling to them. Key positions in the MUP have been occupied by the SDA and the HDZ, and the leading figure in the MUP is the minister. And it goes on, and I don't think I need bother to go through the other parts of the document, so we have it up, to, as I say, rehearse the complaints, which were then rehearsed by all of these witnesses. What is not referred to at all in the final trial brief is the report on the ethnic structure of the ministry, which was prepared, and we haven't put that up, but it's P892, and testimony that was actually given by Mr. Mandic in the Krajishnik case. And can I just remind you of this? It was, although Mr. Mandic resiled from some of his testimony, either voluntarily before he testified, but after he'd seen the defence, or later as a result from questions of the defence, he did not resile from this. And this is page 8650 of his previous testimony, which is P1318.2. And he was asked, Mr. Mandic, did some of the steps towards the preparation for separation of the joint MUP or unified MUP include arming of Serbian police stations or police officials and at least the beginnings of the terminations of non-Serbs from police forces? Mandic replied this: Well, I think it was the other way round then. Up until the beginning of the war, in the police of Bosnia-Herzegovina, there were about 11,000 members of the MUP. From among them, there were 75% Serbs. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, it was mainly Serbs who were in the army and police, which did not correspond to the ethnic pattern of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So conclusions were reached by the senior staff of the MUP to dismiss Serb personnel who were trained and educated to work on this kind of job, and that Bosniaks and Croats should be recruited from elsewhere, including the reserve force and the territorial defence, so that the pattern would correspond with the ethnic pattern in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That means, at that time, there were more Serbs on the force than there were in Bosnia-Herzegovina itself, and that is one of the problems that was faced by the joint MUP. That evidence does not get a mention in the final trial brief. Your Honours, equally, if we look, please, at P905, this was a letter that was sent protesting about Mr. Mandić and his work to all and sundry. When I say all and sundry, I mean Mr. Izetbegović, Mr. Mustafić, Mr. Žepinić, Mr. Habib. And if we look, please, at the next part of the slide, we are writing this letter in respect of the work and behaviour of the Assistant Minister, Mr. Mandić, who's put himself in charge of personnel policy, and oddly enough, his specialty is being the selection and bringing on board of Muslim employees without anybody's consent. So the complaints that are made by the Serb that you heard from about Muslims being brought on were apparently also being brought on by Mr. Mandić. And it goes on to say, on the other hand, when it comes to the Serbian personnel, the wishes and orders of the SDS and Mr. Karadžić are fully respected with no questions asked. And finally, this kind of work is explained by Mr. Mandić's good relationship with the Minister of the Interior, Mr. Mustafić, which originates from their joint business ventures. We demand that Mr. Mandić be urgently prevented in his actions and intentions, and that all remaining vacancies in the BH MUP that belong to the SDA cadre, as per the inter-party agreement, be filled, but without Mr. Mandić's interference. So, you know, these complaints about who was doing what, who was interfering with what, were common to all parties and all sides, and it was not the one-sided issue, if one likes to put it that way, that many of the witnesses, and indeed the brief, would have you believe. Additionally, not mentioned is the October 91 paper, the possibilities of organizing a Serbian Ministry for Internal Affairs. Again, not going to trouble to put it up, but Your Honours, but it's P521. Moreover, it's the reaction by Karadžić, the leader of the SDS, to these arguments over personnel in 1991 was unequivocal. We just look for a moment at part of an intercept, which is P897, a conversation in July of 1991, all arising out of arguments over who had what ministry. Karadžić, in terms, saying to Žepinić, let the collegium meet every morning I was with Izetbegovic last night and Zulfik Karpasic, and I told him right into his face, we'll establish a parallel government, parallel police. We'll withdraw our people and they'll have to be paid by the government. We'll withdraw all our people under arms. We'll establish an entire parallel state if you keep on screwing us, etc. And again, at P903, another intercept, Karadžić and Simovic in September. Tell Žepanić that as of tomorrow we are withdrawing all our ministers and all our officials in the MUP. We are discontinuing the complete partnership, going into opposition. Vlaški, who Your Honours heard from, was removed from his office, and it's over. Tonight at 8 o'clock, I'm going to break up with Izetbegovic. I'm withdrawing everything. Serbian Democratic Party into opposition. We're going to break apart, and then we are going to establish our own SUP, separately and with other men, and we'll make the government separately. We'll make everything separate. Right. Your Honours, it may well be that nobody took Karadžić's threats that seriously in that part of 1991. In fact, it was their mistake, we submit, and they should have taken those threats seriously. Moreover, we do not quite follow, if that's the right word, the defence's train of thought on this, because the defense case is that there simply never was any plan to split the BIH MUP. The only time that it came under active consideration was at the result of the Cutulero agreement that Your Honours have heard so much about. In the Stanišić final brief, between paragraphs 98 and 119, that is the position that they adopt. In which case, it is not easy to see why this background has any relevance to the split which took place, except, as we say, for what was being said by Karadžić at a very early stage. In fact, with respect to the Cutulero plan, Your Honours, the evidence shows that even before the declaration of the Serbian state in BIH in January of 1992, and long before the Cutulero talks got started in February, the split in the MUP was being planned, and planned secretly. On the 19th of December, one has what's being called the variant A and B instructions. And, Your Honours, those were referred to by Karadžić in his speech at the 50th Assembly meeting in 1995. And Your Honours will see an extract from that speech on the screen, and we really start, we mobilized then, we did not have a war, and about 10 lines down, at the moment the war began, in the municipalities where we were in the majority, we had municipal power, held it firmly, controlled everything. In the municipalities where we were in the minority, we set up secret government, municipal boards, municipal assemblies, presidents. You will remember the A and B variants. In the B variant, where we were in the minority, we had set up a government and a brigade, and so on and so forth. And then he deals with the involvement of the JNA. The war began, and the JNA helped as much as it could here and there. It had helped before. He adds he hopes it isn't going out on television, this. General Subordinate helped just before the war began by sending tanks, took the risk, signed for them to go to servicing, while in fact he sent them to Banja. And then it was, he talks about the fall of one of the other municipalities, done with the help of Subotic, who was the colonel here. Distribution of weapons was carried out thanks to the JNA, and so on and so forth. And then, at the bottom, it was the SDS which organized the people and created the army. It was an army. Together with the police, those were the armed forces of the Serbian Republic and Bosnia and Herzegovina. They created the space. They liberated and created the space. And, Your Honours, of course, that is the prosecution case in a nutshell, that the police were the armed force. And together, once VRS was created, did just that, liberated, if that's the word, the territories. I was going back to why we say the split in the MUP was already being planned well before the Cutolero talks. On the 21st of December 1991, the Council of Ministers, as part of this parallel shadow government, was created, and at that stage Žepinić was named as Minister of the Interior, and that's P180. Then we come to the 11th of February meeting in Banja Luka. If we can just have that up for a moment. Now, Your Honours, it is asserted by all the witnesses who Your Honours heard from, who attended the meeting, including Mr. Mandic in particular, that there's no way this was a secret meeting. Mr. Mandic asserted that he even spoke to Mr. Delimustafic about it. History, in the form of Mr. Mandic, does not relate what Mr. Delimustafic's response to this invitation was. We suggest that, in that respect, Mr. Mandic was not telling the truth at all. None of the other witnesses appeared to be able to explain how they had ever got an invitation to this meeting in the first place, or nobody could remember. And if this was an open meeting, open to anyone, there wasn't a single non-Serb person there. The meeting was not held in the CSB Banja Luka, despite the fact that Your Honours saw the CSB Banja Luka had ample rooms to hold the meeting. Your Honours saw the photographs through one of the witnesses. Having said that, Your Honour, it's a matter for Your Honours to decide whether this was, firstly, a meeting that was being kept quiet, and secondly, whether it was a pivotal meeting in the split of the MUP. But clearly, Stanišić's speech said, work has to be done by the organization of the Serbian MUP, starting from the municipal and regional levels up to the Serbian ministry. The Serbian personnel in the MUP must provide the means to strengthen and supply the Serbian MUP, ensuring that resources will be distributed equally. And if one looks very briefly at what each of some of the participants said in turn, Belosevic, I support the decision to establish the Serbian MUP. Zugic, the Serbian MUP has to start work as soon as possible. Jeseric, I only trust my own people and weapons that I have acquired and hidden. The Serbian MUP should be established as soon as possible. Two further quotes. Mr. Vlaški, the only, who also denied that this was a meeting concerned with splitting them up. The only way would be to organize the Serbian MUP and implement all decisions without question. Mr. Draskovic, this is the first time that we are telling each other the truth without the people who have been holding us back. And finally, in the conclusions, suggested that Mr. Stanišić was going to be sent the conclusions of the meeting, but that's not in fact what happened, because if you look at the conclusions, the Serbian Collegium of the MUP is hereby instructed to carry out all preparations necessary for the functioning of the Serbian MUP after the promulgation of the Serbian Republic of Bosnia Constitution. And no mention in any of the conclusions of sending Mr. Stanišić conclusions. On the next important meeting that took place was that of the STS in Holiday Inn on the 14th of February, and there Karadžić explained not only that whilst the Serbs and the Croats wanted the cantons, he was discussing the talks that had gone on, and the Muslims wanted a unitary Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also that under no circumstances were any Serbs to participate in any referendum. The second level of the variant A and B instructions were to be implemented, and he added, as for the army and the defense of the Serbian Krajina, we will anticipate everything. The police, we will make a plan of defense and security operations. And that's P1841. As we say that from the moment the STS had made its decision that there was to be a separate Serbian state in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the formation of its own security forces, both army and police, was a foregone conclusion. And it was one, we say, that was evident to all of the senior MUP officials who attended the February meeting in Banja Luka. Your Honours, can I move then very shortly to mention one other aspect of the, which has come out through the defence cross-examination. Throughout the trial, the defence have attempted and sometimes succeeded in introducing evidence of events which are outside the scope of the indictment, outside the period, in the interests of what they've called context. So that, for example, Your Honours have heard about the alleged secret training in Croatia of Muslim and Croat police officers. Your Honours, that's covered in the Stanišić final brief between paragraphs 62 and 69. Can I just out of interest ask for one document to be put up from this series that related to the training? It's 1D787. Now, as this was put... Oh, it's gone... For some reason, it's gone blank on my screen. Anyhow, no. Yes, thank you. This is a document that's put in by the defence as part of this series of documents showing training going on in Croatia. This is June of 1991. But, Your Honours, it does show, and indeed Mr. Nielsen dealt with this to a certain extent in his report, that these were rumours that was supposed to be secret training, but in actual fact was ordinary training conducted, and don't forget at this stage, Yugoslavia as such still existed, containing a number of different ethnic groups. And if one looks at the list of people here and the commanders, it would appear that they were indeed mixed, Your Honours, between certainly apparently Serbs and in this particular instant Croats. So we suggest that the so-called secret training should again be looked at with a degree of skepticism. Your Honours also heard about events in Bosanski Brod, in Derventa, about Muslim attempts to procure arms, about crisis staffs being formed by the SDA and the HDZ, and about crimes being committed by Muslims or Croats against Serbs. Many of the insider witnesses, the Serb witnesses, were very insistent in having their say about what they said were the crimes committed against the Serbs. Your Honours, and some of which was adduced by defence counsel. Witness ST19 was asked the following series of questions by Mr. Pantelic. It's T593. Witness, which forces killed hundreds upon hundreds of Serbs in Kotovaras municipality? Do you know? Answer, no, I don't. Question, who roasted living Serbs in Kotovaras municipality? Do you know that? No. Question, who burned and levelled the Serb villages in the territory of Kotovaras municipality? Do you know? I don't. No further questions for this witness. Well, Your Honour, that's an extreme example, but nonetheless it is something that was adduced through the defence. Your Honours, because of this trial involves these two accused, and because the evidence that has been led is that which relates to their involvement, Your Honours have no real opportunity to examine the type of evidence that was adduced in its proper context. And the defence that at one stage it seemed was being mounted, namely that all the actions taken by the Serbs were nothing more than self-defence, is not in fact sought to be advanced, nor on the evidence could it have been in the context of the events of 1992. And it may not need saying, but out of an abundance of caution we say, it is not a defence to say that the other side committed crimes, and so we were justified in committing the crimes that we did. Revenge attacks, which is something that's been mentioned often, are still crimes. Your Honours, finally, before I turn to the question of resubordination, can I just talk very briefly about joint criminal enterprise, Mr. Pantelic's favourite topic. Neither accused, in fact, seek to argue in their final trial briefs that the crimes alleged did not take place. In fact, in paragraph 219 of the Župljanin brief, it said in terms, nor, with a few exceptions, namely the special police actions in Kotovaras, do they seek to argue that the police did not take part in crimes. The evidence is overwhelming on that matter. Neither accused further seeks to argue in their final brief that a joint criminal enterprise did not exist. We say that is because the evidence of such an enterprise is overwhelming, not only from what was said at the time and subsequently by members of the Serb political, military and police leadership, but also by the pattern so clearly demonstrated in the address given to you by Mr. Demirjian of the events in the indictment. Your Honours, that the enterprise had as its object the forcible removal of the non-Serbs from the territory of the Serbian state, we say is absolutely clear. And if there were no other evidence but that of the six strategic goals, that would set it out. And Your Honours, can we look at the version, not that given on the 12th of May by Karadžić in the Assembly, but by the note made by General Mladić on the 7th of May, so 5 days before the Assembly, of his discussions with Krajina, where the strategic goals are set out. And goal number 1 is to separate from the Croats and Muslims forever. And then the further goals of the corridor from Krajina, the Drina, Neretva, let me do that one, Neretva, with the anyways, I'll give that one up, even after all this time. A natural border with the Croats, and then a part of Sarajevo is to be ours. The Muslims can have their part of the city and a link with their territory. Then the passage to the sea and links with the Republika of Serb Krajina. Now, the issue in this case is really were the two accused members of the JCE. Both of them deny it. They deny any knowledge of the crimes committed. They say as a result of the lack of communication from their subordinates and or the faulty communications equipment, and Mr. Hannes will deal with that as a separate topic a little later. And to a certain extent, they blame interference from municipal authorities, in particular the crisis staffs. And not surprisingly, Župljanin is running an alternative defense and sets this out as an alternative in a number of different places, that if he did know of the crimes, they fell out with his responsibility, as at the time the perpetrators, if they were members of the MUP, were all resubordinated to the VRS. Of course, Your Honours, the essence of the joint criminal enterprise is that all involved had a role to play. And notwithstanding that the course of the relationships between the political, the army, and the police did not always run smoothly, in the end, as a number of witnesses said, they did share the same goal. The MUP at all times was and had to be an integral component of any plan to take over and retain territory. In every municipality that Your Honours saw this morning, one of the first actions was the takeover of the SJB. Before the creation of the VRS on the 12th of May, the only armed force on which the Bosnian Serbs could positively rely was the MUP. Because at that stage, they did not know, even if the JNA was secretly arming, secretly prepared to help, they could not know whether or not the JNA would come down on their side in any conflict, would, as they did, provide manpower and material to carry on the plan. And so the only armed force at the beginning, until May, and Your Honour saw how many of the takeovers happened before May, was the MUP. We say it's inconceivable that the head of the MUP, who in this case was, we say, a member of the SDS, although it is denied, had been a part of the shadow government from no later than December 1991, together with the head of the police in the largest targeted area for the Serbian state, should have been no more than the innocent tools, which is what it comes down to, of a Machiavellian Bosnian Serb political leadership. The removal of Župljanin, who was, after all, chosen to be the first Minister of the Interior in the shadow government, shows the importance, we submit, that was attached to having a head of the MUP who was prepared to carry out the enterprise. And, Your Honours, as we have shown, we submit, through the evidence as set out in our final trial brief, both of the accused, Stanišić and Župljanin, played their parts in the implementation of the criminal enterprise. Now, can I now very briefly, before I move to Župljanin, turn to the vexed question of resubordination. The accused, and in particular Župljanin, because he was closer to the perpetrators of the crime in his position as chief of CSB, rely on what is described by them as the principle of resubordination, namely, that at all relevant times when crimes were committed by members of the MUP, as we have shown they were under the command and control of the army, the VRS. And they say that in order to assert that this deprived them of effective control of their subordinates. You know, as the focus at this stage is not going to be on the power to prevent or punish being removed from the accused. Mr. Olmsted will deal with that tomorrow. But on the evidence as to whether or not this resubordination actually took place. Now, as for one last time, or maybe more, if the defence is going to let us have a look, please, at Article 104 of the Law of All People's Defence, which is in L1. Your Honours, the word resubordination does not appear in the article. It says, in war, in times of an immediate threat of war and other emergencies, the police may, emphasizing the word may, be used for carrying out combat activities for the armed forces in accordance with the law. We submit the word may makes it clear that this is intended to be the exception and not the rule. And then during its engagement for combat activities in the armed forces, the police shall be under the command of the authorized officer in charge of combat activity. Now, I'm not sure that we put it onto the slide, but, Your Honour, it goes on to say the reserve forces of the police shall be reinforced by military conscripts. Now, Your Honours, we submit that because, as you Honours know, that the great theory of the defence expert Kovacevic is that everybody is a military conscript in a time of immediate threat of war. Your Honours, it's clear here that there is a distinction made between a military conscript and the police. Now, it is the evidence from one of the military witnesses who had actual experience of the conflict during 1992 was that to use the police for combat operations, which according to one witness meant being on the front line, and we suggest that is the obvious common sense meaning of combat in the context of Article 104. A formal process had to be gone through which involved seeking approval from a senior officer who in turn would have to request the use of MUP units from the appropriate MUP level. And by Stanisić's order of the 14th of May, that would be the CSB chief. Moreover, it was a procedure of limited duration, geography, and purpose. Now, there's no doubt, the evidence shows, there were police units who were actually re-subordinated. The police brigade, which was set up by Župljanin in 1992, November of 1992, was clearly a police unit that had been re-subordinated to the military for the purposes of action. But as expressed in at least one report, such resubordination was, as it's put, occasional. This is P163, the meeting of the Tribunal working group in August, where the chief of the Doboj CSB mentioned the possibility of a conflict between the army and the MUP, regarding, in the view of army members, the privileged wartime position of MUP employees in relation to them. There was a classic example of the relationship not always running smoothly. He therefore suggested that the reserve police force and the soldiers on the front line alternate tours of duties, or that the reserve police force is occasionally subordinated to the army. Now, there were obviously instances where strict procedures weren't followed, and this particularly, we would suggest, depended on the relationship between the local police, MUP commander, and the VRS officer. If it was a good relationship, or the VRS officer had a particularly overbearing nature, then it was clear that the proper procedures were sometimes bypassed. And it's worth, again, I hope for one last time, having a look at the Lisica-Bilosevic correspondence. Could we have a look at 1D263, please, or part thereof? This was Mr. Bilosevic writing to, as he then was, Colonel Lisica, and saying that he's complaining, it's not on the screen, but he's complaining about the robberies and so on and so forth. And he says, in order to prevent these occurrences, we are forced to withdraw the police from combat operations on the front in Bosanski Brod and Karadžić. We will carry out the withdrawal of the police from these fronts. Now, Your Honours, the plain meaning of this is what I'm going to do. This is not a request, this is what I'm going to do. And then we hope that you will understand the reasons why we are forced to withdraw the police from the battlefield. Expect your positive reply. So we get the letter back, the following, that's the 2nd of October, the 3rd of October, from Colonel Lisica, who, as your Honours know, takes the view that in a time of war, whether declared or undeclared, he's the boss, and whether or not the regulations agree that. I do not authorise the withdrawal of the police forces, as if I do so, the front will soon reach Doboj, and you will not have any territory under your control. I hope you'll correctly understand the reasons why the police forces cannot be withdrawn. We welcome all forms of cooperation and assistance between the military police and the police force. In fact, he's probably making, Your Honours may think, a fairly sensible point, that if there's fighting going on there, the police are better off staying with him. And then, on the 6th of October, Bilosevic replies and says, I was rather surprised by the content of the order, all the more since I believe that cooperation between the TG3 and the Doboj CSB has been excellent. And, Your Honours, we say that is the operative word, cooperation. And then, if we go further on, we've skipped about official vehicles being put at his disposal, while I was issuing approval for the engagement of the police in combat outside my authorization and the order of the Minister of the Interior, there was looting and disorder on a massive scale. Your Honours, we suggest that, again, we have the CSB chief giving approval, and he himself says, because of his relationship with, presumably Colonel Lister, he had bypassed the chain of command which ought to have taken place. And as we say, we accept the evidence is plain that sometimes the proper procedures were not gone through, but all were aware of those procedures, and resubordination was not, as the Župljanin defence above all would have you believe, an automatic thing, as they say. If the army was there, then the police were resubordinated. It was a highly technical matter. Your Honours, in order to overcome the plain fact that not one of the crimes charged in which members of the MUP were involved, is there any evidence at all to suggest that the police who were involved were part of a resubordinated unit? The defence are, in fact, forced to try and extend what we say was a formal, short-lived action to encompass all police action taken in an area which contained a military unit under the principle that you have heard over and over again of singleness or unity of command, which is a military term and certainly applies if there are resubordinated units properly resubordinated. But it does not, we suggest, on the evidence, encompass every single action in which the police or the military coordinated or cooperated. Your Honours, all of the undisputed actions by the police, the crimes that were committed, the looting, the destruction, the killings that took place after events such as the shelling of Kozarac or Mahala, the suffocation of the prisoners on the truck who had been brought by the police to Manjača, as is evidenced in the report from one of the persons at Manjača, the guarding of prisoners in camps which have no military presence whatsoever, as demonstrated to you by Mr. Demirjian. All of that, it is asserted, took place whilst the police officers involved were resubordinated. And it's asserted that the words cooperation and coordination all imply that a relationship of resubordination existed. Well, Your Honours, if we look for a moment at P60.3, this was the order given to, I believe it's Lieutenant Colonel Piric, that he was to move his troops and, as it's put, establish full cooperation with the organs of the government in Sanski Most municipality and collaboration with the TO and police units. Now, this was shown to the defence expert, who said that means, although it's difficult because I didn't know the background, but in my view that means resubordination. Your Honours, can I just go to private session for 1 moment?
Yes. And we now take the break and resume in 20 minutes.
All right, we will be back.